Nah, I got something to prove and I ain't never gonna give up. Plenty of juice and I ain't never gonna waste it. Something to do and I ain't never wanna quit it. So come on, get a little bit, I know you wanna play with it.
Coming to you from Studio Iguana Monk down in the Big Dirty, it's the Twisted Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a working artist living in the real world. Please welcome your hosts, Larry Lines and Troy Winscott.
All right, this is the Twisted Pop Podcast, episode 4. I'm Larry Lines.
I'm Troy Winscott.
We've done a couple takes of this, and it's getting kind of funny at this point.
Yeah, it's not that funny. It's just ridiculous.
So, this week, we are talking about things that we don't like, and we're having an interview with Johnny Bodman. Anything else to say on this subject?
Johnny's a super talented artist from the punk rock scene. Spent some time over in Norway doing tons and tons of different punk and metal albums, thrashcore albums.
He's done a lot.
He's got a huge, vast amount of artwork to flip through.
And he's also a writer.
He's got stories about everything.
Yeah.
And he's super enthusiastic about doing art.
Yeah, and there's no way that you can have a conversation that is hard to develop with Johnny Bodman. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a complete stranger. He's just going to walk up, and I mean, that's my experience anyway.
Yeah.
He's pretty... he'll start a conversation with anybody.
Yeah, Johnny hung out. I don't know if we got this at all, but Johnny hung out in the studio so much that we eventually felt compelled that we had to hire him.
Yeah, he was going to stick around until he
was going to do stuff for free until I felt guilty, and then we had to hire him in the studio.
That's a good segue into this.
I hate art.
I hate art.
I hate art. Art is stupid, art is boring, A-R-T-T art.
Most of your blog, I'm going to go back to the blog. Most of your blog is about critiquing something that you do like, but not necessarily around your blog. Name something that you do not love.
Okay, this pops into my head a lot because there's a couple things, but it's usually around music. And I do not like Nirvana.
Oh, I did not expect that.
I don't like Nirvana.
I would have thought if I would have said, what do you think about Nirvana? You would have had some kind of redeeming quality to say.
There is, and that's why it's so disappointing to me that I don't like them.
But there's a great line out of The Wrestler about Kurt Cobain.
Is there?
Yeah, it's fucking great. They're in a bar, they're reminiscing about 80s fucking rock and roll. And then the little fucker Kurt Cobain came around and ruined it for everybody. some shit like that. Anyway, Nirvana. What don't you love about Nirvana?
And there's something else. Okay, there's a whole thing here because then it bleeds over into Foo Fighters, who I wish I liked.
This is a good segue because we talked about it about Steven's upbringing.
Yeah.
Around Nirvana and Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, I know, and I bit my tongue at the time. Okay, it was his interview. You know what I'm saying?
Awesome.
You know.
So what don't you love?
Well, first of all, before he died, right? I hated that he hated his audience. Something bothered me about that. Like that. And I can't say that he just hated them. Yeah, I get it, but I really tried to like them. But there are a couple things happening for me. I went to Berkeley in 1989. And you know what art school is like. Mm. The whole world doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. There's only what's been made. Right. You don't know what's happening when you're at art school. And I had no idea. All of a sudden, Nirvana was up. But that was 2 years in that I had already figured this out. So... And then you're studying someone like Coltrane... or any of the greats, even Zappa, and then you're listening to grunge, just a couple of chords, and people that once again are going back to sort of the punk aesthetic of we're not good on our instruments, but they're definitely better at playing the instruments than punk players. Anyway, this is what's going on. It's like I'm studying Coltrane, and then I'm like, in the world we have grunge, and here it is, and you're like, fuck, what the hell is this? This sucks. And then I was like, oh, there's something there though, because then you backtrack yourself because you're in art school and you know that you're being a snob about everything because you're studying all the grades, right? So then I started paying attention to it, and I was like, this is really good stuff. And then the way that he would talk about his stuff was so disappointing. It's like listening to Flea talk. You really want him to say something profound because he basically.
But it's just not going to happen.
No.
Especially from fucking sub pop, grunge.
Yeah, he seems like a
branding.
And so Kurt Cobain seemed like just a kid, like an angry kid.
No, he was, yeah.
And yeah, all right, I was an angry kid too, but I was also at the time trying to get away from it. So there's timing on it, and then I didn't like that he didn't like his audience, and then you're listening to it and you're going, oh, he's criticizing his audience at the same time, and then later on when he killed himself, I was so pissed off, and it was that was because of Justin.
Yeah.
And Justin, our friend Justin, blew his head off, and
rather successfully.
Yeah, rather successfully. So when I wasn't really able to be angry about that, but when Kurt Cobain did it, I was like, "What a dick! What a fucking dick!" And then the Foo Fighters come along out of that, and I was like, there was a good tight band, back there, and I was like, here's the Foo Fighters, and album after album has come out, and I go, I don't like it. And I tried, and I would talk to other musicians, and they would be like, man, I just keep listening to this new Foo Fighters album. And we're like, why? I don't get it. I really don't. I can't understand why that is. There might have been. If I get into something technical about this, then it's like we're expecting too much from rock and roll. Mm-hmm. So you're in sort of like this minefield, right? Mm-hmm. But then if I'm going to compare either of those bands to who they most resemble to me, right, they don't measure up in any way, and that's Black Sabbath. Like that's, if you're going to say the Black Sabbath of grunge was Kurt Cobain and Foo Fighters and Nirvana, right?
Yeah.
Then they don't measure up at all, and they don't measure up against the other grunge players who are riff rockers, right? And so technically it started to get annoying to me. Like I hated Pearl Jam, but then I kept listening to the guitar player, and I was like, holy shit. Like, he is really good. He's what I would like to be as a guitar player at the time that I discovered that. So what else don't I like? There was one thing I was talking about. I can't remember what it is that I just absolutely hate. Anyway, what about you?
I thought about this for about 3 seconds before I asked you. And I thought it might turn the tables on me, but I don't know. I take a lot of time to love and hate stuff, I think. I don't like... I guess I don't like the current grassroots movements.
The activist movements?
Any of them. I mean, like, art, activists. Like, any of it. I just...
Sort of the DIY crew, here we are, this is our...
Yeah, I think this would go into another segment, but I hate to put such a modern corporate spin on everything, but I think their branding is wrong. For example, Why do you have to call yourself a graffiti artist? Is that because of the street cred? Okay, well, you know, the muralists in Mexico during their revolution, which, you know, we have a great exhibit going on at the MFA right now, like documenting that whole movement. It's like they called themselves muralists. I mean, if you're just running around the street tagging, okay, you can call yourself a writer or, you know,
I'm right.
A graffiti artist if you want.
My pen just happens to be a spray can.
Right. It's not that. It's not the underlying, like, because a lot of people have, you know, a lot of graffiti artists have like a philosophy, like the guy from Mexico who came up and like infiltrated the Manil and then tagged the Picasso.
I was just reading about that the other day.
And then how he escaped and then turned himself in at the border. I think like after that, it's like this huge thing. And I thought the director of the Manila had a great like reply in that, and it's probably a whole nother segment too about how, you know, she understood it. And I expected the establishment, you know, because like all of that shit is already acquisitioned. All that art is not ours. It's and I get the whole movement and I support the movement. I just think that their branding at the grassroots level is just.
So how does Banksy fit into this?
I don't. I just had a conversation with Kevin Troy like yesterday, and his son. His son is really into Banksy, and they're both, you know, they both are into Banksy, and I don't. I think it's bullshit. That is a branding that has worked for them. With the opposite of the message is bullshit.
That's so funny.
Right.
I would have never, like, this is as surprising to me as Nirvana and the Foo Fighters are for you about me. I would have never guessed this. It's funny, too, because Iggy, my son, I wish he were here, because I've been having this conversation with him. He hates it. He hates Banksy. He
probably hates it for a completely different reason. But
it's very similar.
Is it really?
Yeah.
This whole branding of he's the Robin Hood of artists, like stealing
used the same words. That's funny.
Well, anyway. That's his whole brand, right? I mean, it's like that's what they tout like over and over, that he's the poor man's Robin Hood out there just stealing it back from the man kind of thing. And that message in itself fundamentally is a good point. But the underlying current of it, that it's this anonymous artist, or I don't think it's one artist. I think it's like a co-op of artists.
Yep.
That they've co-opted. And the point yesterday that was good at lunch that they brought up were, you know, he has he, in quotes, he has access to a ton of resources in the art world, like being able to take over a whole pet shop or a whole storefront to seem as a pet shop. This is an incredible amount of resources and money that have been poured into somebody's vision and then co-opted as a group as of production artists just to produce this stuff. Because none of it, if you look at it, none of it over as a period of work, a body of work, none of it is really a series. I mean, we recognize certain things like the rioter throwing a bouquet, or, you know, some of the stenciled graffiti, but that's anybody can sit down and do those stencils.
Yep. It's also funny too because it's supposed to be against the man, but it's like well funded, and they're attributing value to stuff.
Yeah. You don't believe the hype.
Yeah.
It's bullshit. That's funny. But that's I think most grass movements, again, like, their branding is wrong. The message is probably right, but the branding's wrong. Where Banksy got the branding right, but then all of the underlying message is just total, just
co-opted stuff that he's fighting against.
Yeah, it's all acquisition bullshit. And we're here today with Johnny Bodman. I think you prefer Johnny.
Yep, Johnny's fine.
Is it a family dub?
No, actually, when I was in first grade, there were three kids with John as a surname, and the teacher needed to differentiate. So there was one kid who was actually Jonathan, so that left two Johns, and she said, "Which one wants to be Johnny?" And I raised my hand, and it's been Johnny ever since.
In the name of King George, St. Andrew, rise and be recognized.
That's really funny. So does your family call you Johnny?
No, not at all.
Not at all. They call
Not
you
at all.
John.
They call me John.
Wow.
Yep.
Now, it's so funny how like just a coincidence of four Johns.
Yeah, my father actually gets quite angry when people refer to me as Johnny because I'm named after my grandfather, who was a captain of industry. He was a soap maker for Lever Brothers, and John Whittlesey Bodman the first, and I am John Whittlesey Bodman the second. Yep.
I see. So, on that note, on that opening little diatribe there, how do you work in the morning?
In the morning, not well at all.
How's it work? Well, let me back up. What do you do, Johnny?
I'm a production artist.
Ah.
Yep, I'm a production artist, and I dabble in social work.
How do you work?
How do I work?
Yeah.
Sporadically. You know, the process is something that for me is ever evolving, ever refining. You know, these days it's all about working on discipline.
So, if I would roll back further, when did you first really become interested in art?
Oh man, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I had a cousin who was a little bit older, probably 12 or 13, and you know, I'm an only child, so when we would go visit my aunt and uncle, he was probably the only male role model that was, you know, in my immediate circle, and his name is Michael. And Mike had comic books. You know, this is back in the 70s when comic books were still 25 cents. And I remember he had a stack of Marvel comics, Captain America, so forth. And he would read them, you know, that and Mad Magazine. And after you read a comic, I guess, you know, a half dozen times, they got stuck in a pile in the closet. And you know, when I would come visit, he would give them to me. Hey, you want this stack of comic books? And I read them, and I really enjoyed them, and I wanted to write my own comic books.
What was in that stack?
What was in the stack?
Yeah, that you remember.
I remember Captain America. There was some of the Jack Kirby issues with the Falcon. I remember there was the one, the Mad Bomb issue with when AIM had the explosive device that would drive everybody on the planet insane, so they could, you know, do the world domination thing.
Mad Bomb.
Yep, Mad Bomb. I think it was like Captain America, like 125, somewhere around there. Early appearance of the Falcon. A lot of Thor, Avengers. A lot of the team up ones that were big in the 70s. Marvel 2-in-1. Marvel Team Up, you know, those kind of things. And then because I had this affinity for comic books, whenever I'd go to garage sales or whatever, you could always pick up like the box of comic books for $5. So I get a lot of the 70s DC stuff. The ones that really stand out to me are the Jack Kirby, Forever People, the New Gods. Stuff that I think is kind of making a resurgence. I mean, I know that they've got some of the New Gods characters are going to be in the new Justice League movie. But those are the ones that really stood out at me. I mean, I had a pretty boring suburban lifestyle, and there was the DC and Marvel universe was where my head went. You know, when I wasn't required to focus on the.
And where were you living at that time?
Exeter, New Hampshire. Actually, I lived in Exeter, New Hampshire until I was about 10 years old, and then moved to the dirty South.
Mississippi.
No, actually, Mobile, Alabama, then Louisiana, New Orleans, Louisiana after that.
Okay. So your interest in art first was through comic books.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
Did you just start drawing at the same time that you became interested in comic books?
Probably around the same time, period. Yeah. I mean, I would try to write my own comic books, or just draw the superheroes and the supervillains. I was a big fan of the supervillains. Before there were graphic novels, they had like some of the Marvel compendiums, like Origin of Superheroes. Bring on the Bad Guys was one that I really enjoyed. It had like the origin stories of a lot of the big supervillains, Loki, the Red Skull, Doctor Doom.
So when you started drawing, you were just mainly copying? Did you do some
Absolutely.
tracing and stuff like that?
No tracing. I never did
you just
tracing.
Went like side by side copying the art.
Exactly. Just me and a box of crayons or colored pencils.
Yeah.
Kind of went for it.
And what age was this?
Got 6, 7 years old.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What about high school and your formal training?
Formal training. I didn't do formal training until I was well into college. High school. My formative years for high school was in New Orleans, Louisiana, and by the time my testicles descended, I'd been kicked out of every decent and respectful private school in New Orleans. So I wound up in public school. And the arts programs in New Orleans and Louisiana, not a big emphasis on the arts. No. I remember the art teacher, I can't remember her name, but I remember she smoked. And she would go have bathroom breaks, and she would go and smoke in the little alcove right outside the teacher's lounge.
And this is a public school. The public school that you landed in.
This is a public school, McMain Magnet. Yep.
And did you start? If you were to say, I say you have a personal style because the stuff that I've seen you do. Do you know when what I'm talking about and when that style emerged?
If you see a style, clue me in, because I think that's something I'm still trying to nail down.
Well, maybe that's true, like your whole life, right?
Right.
You keep trying to find a style, and that's how you sort of evolve, and different things happen.
Right. My two big influences as recently. There's so many. There's a great quote in this book. I think it's called "Steal Like an Artist." That was like, if you copy one person, you're a thief. If you copy 100 person, you're inspired. Or something to that effect.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and the big ones that stand out to me, Jack Kirby is a huge influence, but also Simon Bisley, a British artist. His stuff blows me away every time I see it. That guy's doodles are masterworks in my opinion. So.
What kind of stuff were you doing in high school?
In high school, that's when music became a factor in high school. So there was there was that punk rock aesthetic. I was rabid for the artwork of Raymond Pettibon, the guy that did the Black Flag album covers, and he always would do these flyers for punk rock shows that were kind of they were almost like cartoons. It was usually an illustration with some sort of, some phrasing or whatever on there, a statement or something that would kind of offset, the drawing. And there was the one of the cop with the gun in his mouth, and there'd be some phrase like, you're gonna make me come, you fucking pig, or something like that. That was just brilliant. It was so incendiary. There's no parent in the world that wouldn't see that and just shudder. So
we all had a bunch of hippie parents who thought they couldn't be offended, and they'd seen everything, and then punk came along, and we showed them these flyers and album covers.
Not me. My parents were not hippies. Absolutely not. My dad's like, He was more like McCarthy era, you know, you know, the government can do no wrong. He's very staunch, hardcore Republican. Thought Ronald Reagan walked on water. You know, that's why he survived the shooting, because, you know, God had his hand over him. You know, my comment was, if God had his hand over him, why did he get shot in the first place? You know, seems like if God favored you, you know, you wouldn't have to deal with that sort of shit.
Definitely a punk in the making.
Right.
I totally see how that would work.
So,
Yeah.
As those formative years, though, what role does the artist have in society now?
Well, I think right now, I mean, the artist is more important than ever, because social media is the driving force. I mean, it's no longer network news. It's no longer print media. Everything is instantaneous. Everything is digital. You know, the drawback with that is the fact that, you know, most people have at best a 30-second attention span. So if you're going to have, you know, art, you know, it's got to really have some depth and weight, or else it becomes a one-line joke. I mean, it becomes something that you see it and then it's gone. So I think it's really, if you can break through that 30-second, you know, attention span, when you go to any museum, I mean, I do this myself. You know, you look at a painting for 30 seconds, move to the next one, move to the next one, move to the next one. You know, nobody sits and actually contemplates the work. Nobody, you know, gets close and takes a look at things. I mean, it's just, we try to shovel as much shit into our heads as we possibly can, and then it's on to the next thing. And it's become so fluid that, you know, there's no time to reflect. There's no time to absorb and assimilate, you know, the message or the beauty, you know, just the ambiance. You know, it's fast food.
That's a good point. I've heard somebody refer to that we're like in the middle of a new Renaissance period, where everybody's like, there's more art now than ever. It's like there's so many people creating things at the same time. But the difference is that we're not actually, I mean, that would, your point, that would be, maybe there's a lot more art, but nobody's actually absorbing any of it.
Right.
It's sort of rolling off of us.
Well, it also comes from the fact that, you know, as our society becomes more and more automated, as our society becomes, you know, more and more entertainment and leisure based, of course you're going to have more time for, you know, for art. You know, but I mean, it's kind of like those Home Depot commercials, you know, you can do it, we can help. You know, everybody can be an artist. You know, well, can they really? Maybe. I mean, it depends on how broad of a definition of art you want to, you want to cling to. I mean, you know, can everybody be an artist? Maybe. I mean, can everybody make a living at it? Probably not. I mean, that's, to me, is the challenge these days, is getting a paycheck. You know, you know, I don't want to work a shitty job in order to fund my art, or in order to give me the quote freedom unquote to work on my art. You know, yet at the same time, I find myself lacking the discipline to you know, make my art take off on its own. You know, given my druthers, I mean, there's a lot of cool shit on Netflix, right? So I tend to be a victim of of my own appetite for distraction.
Yeah, that actually that happens to me more often than I'd care to admit, where I end up with on the computer, supposed to be working on something that I want to be doing, and then I'm on a social networking thing.
Right.
I see some alert come up on the computer, and then I'm just like gone. I'm gone down some rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
And it happens over and over and over again. But yeah, I mean, it's a constant struggle for the artist anyway, right?
Right.
I also think that there's something to collaboration with it as well. I'm going to start with college. Where'd you go to college?
Which time?
Doesn't matter. You could list all of them. That's
okay.
fine.
Let's see. I think in 1989 I got a scholarship to the University of South Alabama in Mobile, Alabama. Then I wound up in Houston at the University of Houston. Then, let's see, there was University of Texas at Austin, very briefly. Then College of Visual Arts in St. Paul, Minnesota, and then briefly Queen's College in London, and then that's really.
And all those where you were in an art program?
Yes, yeah. Art has always factored to some degree in my college education, except for briefly in the beginning. I wanted to be a psych. I think the first semester I was at the University of South Alabama, it was psychology was the focus, but I didn't really like the psychology classes that I wound up taking. And then at my dad's behest, there was a business, and I think I dropped out of that like the second week of classes. Like I couldn't stand that at all. Like, nope, not interested. Not my cup of tea. But any art-related classes, even like literature, I gobble them up. Absolutely love that stuff.
So were these programs good then? I mean, do you think they were good for your development, or why? What's your theory on why you didn't finish any of those programs? Or
well, why? Because I was more invested in my drug use than I was my education. I mean, that's
that seems like it's a pretty solid theory.
I don't think it had anything to do with the quality of the programs I was in. It was just that I liked cocaine and methamphetamine a lot more. I liked strippers. Yeah, like give me strippers and an 8-ball of crank. That
miserable.
That trumps art theory or color theory class any day. Take that, Joseph Albers.
Yeah, totally.
So I mean, I knew the answer sort of to that.
Sure.
But I just wanted to. Well, I knew you were going to say it. And but of those programs, I mean, what kinds of things like in the art classes? I mean, you're obviously devoured the literature in any of the art classes, but is there anything that you picked up in any of those schools that were just like, man, that was awesome?
Yeah, I mean, there was the one that really stands out to me is the College of Visual Arts in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was the first time I went to a dedicated art school. And it's funny because it's such a different dynamic, I think, in a lot of the colleges I went to before, like the University of Texas or, South Alabama or U of H. Did I mention U of H? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Where, the arts programs, I mean, there's that old, I'm an artist. Oh, really? Okay. What do you do what do you do to make money? There's what you do and then there's what you do for a living, right?
You get I see. I know your point. I mean, it's like in a university, you go, "What's your major?" and you say art, and they go, "Okay, so what are you planning on doing with your life when you get out of here?"
What are you gonna do for a career?
Yeah, like people don't understand that like everything they look at is art. Every time they turn on the radio, every time they hear a commercial, whatever it is, somebody's writing it, somebody's playing music, somebody's acting, somebody's drawing something.
Every letter of every word is a piece of art. To dovetail onto that, like you go to a dedicated art school and take a typography class, and you have that every letter is a piece of art. Every letter of every word is a piece of art, like to the nth degree. I mean, to the point where people are using micrometers and stuff to develop their own alphabet style, their own font. I mean, it takes on an entirely different. It just kicks it to a different level, especially what got me, and I don't know if it's like this at every art school, but there seemed to be this kind of intramural rivalry, like the design students hated the fine art students hated the typography students, the sculpture students, so there were always these kind of like, shitting on other people's skill sets sort of thing.
Right. At Berkeley, it was the engineering and producing department would go, why would you come here to learn how to play music? Right. Why wouldn't you go to the new school? This place sucks for learning music. Right. And then you would go, well, why are you here for engineering? You're never going to get a job out of here. You're just going to go make coffee. Right. You should have gone to Full Sail or something like that. Right.
Right.
So that was like the questioning your thing. And then there was always like, if you said, I'm doing professional music, which was a cross section, they're like, oh, so you're not good at anything.
Right. Nice.
Yeah. So it happens everywhere. But it is interesting, like you're saying, though, because you're in a focused art school, the question of what you're going to do for a living doesn't actually come up.
Right. Because, I mean, most of the classes, I can't remember a single bad class. Like, in other words, a class that I dreaded going to. Like, whereas, like, I remember when I was at U of H, like, I had to take a statistical analysis class. And, I mean, it was, like, just showing up to that class was like, oh, my God, I got to go fucking sit through this goddamn class. And it was literally, I was a convict marking days off a calendar. You know, like how many more of these classes do I have to fucking endure, you know, to get these credits? And it wasn't like that in art school. You know, in art school, man, every day was a frickin' adventure. And it's funny because the one class I remember being problematic was a sculpture class, mold making and casting.
Why was that problematic?
Because that's mold making and casting was difficult, man.
It's
like
really
it's a bitch.
Yeah.
And trying to make one of our one of the requirements to complete the class was you had to make, I think, 25 or 50 objects. Like you had to take an object and then make 25 duplicates of that object, you know, and you could use plaster, resin. I mean, it didn't matter. It was kind of open. It was just like, okay, you pick an object, you could make it. It could be, you know, one guy did like one of those giant bolts, like the type of, a bolt like a foot long, and probably, you know, the head of that thing was at least 3 inches in diameter. And, you know, that sounds real easy, right? Until you consider the threads on that thing,
right.
like the fine threads on it. So, I mean, you know, everything had its level of difficulty. But I remember that mold making casting class was fucking brutal. And I wound up doing 25 bunnies. And I cheated. Like, I just went with, like, a chocolate rabbit. Like, you know, I had this feud with the dean going on about rabbits, believe it or not. So, and I remember...
Do tell.
Yeah, I remember, like, the conversation ended basically with me walking out of her office saying, you want fluffy little bunnies? I'll give you fluffy little bunnies. And fucking every piece of art that I turn in for the next year is going to be bunny themed. And it was. Like, every single thing that I did, like, the end of my sophomore year and the beginning of my junior year was all bunny themed. So I used like one of those little chocolate Easter bunnies as the as my project.
That's positive.
As the positive, and you know, I think I just did like plaster. It was just like plaster with like a resin mold, and those things kept breaking. Like the ears wouldn't, you know, there were bubbles in it. I mean. It was like you get, you know, you pull the mold apart and you'd have like a big frickin' like Swiss cheese like bubbles in the thing. And I wanted to cry by the end of that class. I mean, it was like, because they had to be 25 perfect copies. Like they had to be flawless. And that is a lot more difficult than it sounds.
That's my field of study, and it's still difficult to think in those terms if you're not doing it all the time. Mold making, any kind of sculpture, I mean, because, you know, it's going to fall over.
Yeah. Really, that was a sculpture major, actually. That was,
right.
Yeah, that's what I wound up choosing. And I wonder, I still don't remember why I did that. But I wanted to do installation sculpture. Because I was a big fan of this guy Matthew Barney, who did this series of movies called the Cremaster Cycle, and I was enthralled by them. I mean, it's some amazing shit, and of course this guy, I mean this guy could, like, you know, poop in a Dixie cup, and someone would give him $100,000 for it. This guy was like in medical school, and he dropped out to become a sculptor. He wound up marrying Bjork. I mean, I guess they're breeding an army of super artists somewhere, like in the Arctic Circle.
So what themes are you pursuing now? More rabbits?
No, not so much on the bunnies. Although I have a soft spot for bunnies.
Imagine that she created that. You should write her a thank you letter.
Right. Now it's I like first of all with art, I want to do what I like, but I want to get paid. So that's the alchemy there, is how can I make that happen? It's still that comic book style of art, but I'm interested in doing concert posters. I'm just interested in doing some sort of production art where I can, get up in the morning and do my art and sell it to somebody that's eager to give me their money and not bicker, and then go to bed.
So speaking of concert art, album art, rock and roll fueled art, is that what you did abroad?
Yes, actually it is. I was fortunate enough to go overseas. I won a juried art show in, I want to say 2004, when I was at the College of Visual Arts, and won a scholarship to study in London. At the time, I was also dating a Norwegian exchange student, and she wound up moving back to Norway. She's a really good artist herself, named Andrea Kvarving. And she currently lives, I believe, in Trondheim, Norway. She was kind enough to invite me to stay with her when I wound up dropping out of college my senior year. And that was because I wound up getting a piece pulled out of the juried show that I won the year before because of the dean of students said it was misogynistic. That's an entirely different story. But I wound up living in Trondheim, Norway for quite some time.
What year was that?
That was 2005.
Yeah.
So I was there from 2005 to 2006. And I wound up doing a lot of concert posters for Plata Records and some of the bands that they produced. Victimized was one, Disorder, a couple of others. A lot of them were from Finland, Sweden. I wish I could pronounce some of their names. Decibeline was one, and I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But yeah, I just, they would say, hey, do you want to do a concert poster for this show? We'll pay you X number of crowns. And I'd say, sure. And I just draw it up and give it to one of these guys. There was a guy, his name was Lars. And Lars worked for I think it was a pretty respectable design firm. And he had the mohawk and the leopard print tattoo on the side of his head, and always wore like the jeans. It was just mostly patches and stuff. And yet he was the production manager of a very nice art firm. I mean, I remember walking with him one day to the building that he worked in. And I was like, you work in there? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, looking like that, and he's got the safety pin through his nose and shit. And he was like, yeah. And he's like, they don't care what I look like here. They just care about the work that I do.
So for a less subcultured audience, what kind of music were you designing for?
Thrashcore mostly, black metal type stuff, speed metal, the heavier end of the punk rock spectrum. Black metal, I can't really say did a whole lot of stuff with the black metal community because they're very insular up there. Those guys, man, and I'll be honest, black metal to me is hilarious. Like that shit, it sounds like someone feeding a cattail first into a wood chipper. But they are rabid about defending it because it is distinctly Norwegian. It is their claim to fame. That's theirs. Just like jazz music is American. That's ours, and you can't fuck with it. So mostly what I did was I worked with some local bands. One band, there's a band called the Harbor Hookers, and I've tried to find them on the internet. They've only got 1 or 2 singles out there, and they were amazing. Seeing them live was very much like watching I imagine watching the Stooges would have been like in 1973. I mean, these guys played some high intensity rock and roll. So when these guys would ask me like, hey, do you want to do a concert poster for us or design a t-shirt or stickers or whatever? Yeah, I jumped at the opportunity because not only did I get to do cool artwork, but I got to hang out with these guys too. And they were just amazing people over there. Like Norway, they have an entirely different way of doing things. Like because of their communal nature. The place where I lived was actually a commune called Svartlamon. Like if you wanted to be in a band, you could go to this place. There was a place called the Ufahus, right? And Ufahus is where they had the All Thing. And I don't know if you're any familiar with Viking culture, but the All Thing is been going on for centuries. It's basically where the community meets to vote on civic issues. So anyone over the age of 15 can come and have a say. And it could be anything like, all right, trash is going to get picked up on Tuesdays instead of Thursdays, to we're only going to sell hashish, on this street, no more heroin. Like, the heroin dealers are going to get run off to the crappy alley behind, the convenience store. And everybody has a voice. You can bring any issue to the table. It's also where they have, punk rock shows, but they would also have these rooms that were like trailers that were recording studios. And so if I wanted to start a band, I could go there to the little committee that was running the Ufahus and say, hey, I want to start a band. And be like, what do you need? I need equipment. Great. There's a room filled with drums, filled with guitars, filled with whatever you need, and here's a space. So here's what happens. You have the equipment, you've got the space to rehearse. In 6 months, I need you to record four demo songs and play like X number of shows. And when these bands would come in from out of town, you would be one of the opening bands. Like they'd just be like, hey, your band Scumfuck, they're going to be opening up for the Crimson Flyers or whatever from Denmark. Get your shit together. And it was awesome because I would see these kids, like they would go and they would take the deal, and some of them would succeed, some of them would fail miserably.
But the net was there.
The net was there, and the community was there to support them. I mean, they were everybody showed up to these gigs, and there was such a sense of community spirit. One time the cops showed up to shut down a show because they heard that someone was selling beer to minors, right? Because there's it's a communal thing. So if of course they were selling beer to minors. Their attitude was, well, if we let them have a few beers, no big deal. If we don't, they're just going to go to get heroin from the guys behind the convenience store, right? So might as well let them hang out with us and drink with us because that's what we're doing. Then, say, no, you can't do that. Because if they want to get fucked up, they're going to get fucked up. So anyway, one night, I forget who was playing, but there was a disturbance out front, and like these two cops were there, and they're like, we're shutting the show down. And these people were like, why? Why are you shutting the show down? Like, because you're selling beer to minors. And I remember like a couple of guys like pulling out their cell phones and making phone calls. And next thing you know, like people came from everywhere, like punk rockers, skinheads, like black, white, you name it, carrying baseball bats, garden implements. I mean, like swinging chains. I mean, it was like the fucking Warriors. And they lined up 3 deep in front of this place, and a couple more cop cars showed up. And so there's like a total of like 6 cops. And then there's like 40 or 50 like punk rockers or metalheads like standing there with the music. You can still hear the music playing in the background. And the cops left. Like they stood down the cops. And I was like, this would never, ever, ever happen in America. Never. Yeah. But that was their type of...
It would just escalate until it turned into a violent scene.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. The cops would like go Daryl Gates on people and just, run them over like Tiananmen Square.
Well, we have the examples here in Houston with Walters before it moved.
Right. So when you've got a community spirit like that, man, who wouldn't want to be a part of that?
Yeah.
And I loved it there. Unfortunately, I also started, I had been sober for a number of years prior to moving to Norway. And when I went over there, people were really into my artwork. They were very supportive. And of course, I wound up, getting involved, willingly and eagerly getting involved with the wrong people. I got back into the drug scene, and I do not handle my drugs well at all. So, when I'm fucked up, I'm fucked up. I'm not productive, antisocial, violent, aggressive, and not a whole lot of fun to be around. So I wound up getting back into the amphetamine scene, and my artwork. I couldn't complete any projects for anybody, and I just got written off. And ultimately, I got into debt to some drug dealers that were like, "You just need to. If you can't pay us, you need to leave the country." And I disrespected this poor woman that had brought me over there and had given me a leg up. She basically washed her hands of me, and I don't blame them. The people were right. They were like, "You American, you need to learn some self-control." And they couldn't. They literally could not understand why I couldn't stop. Why I couldn't show up for work on Monday morning. Because these guys, the Norwegians drink hard, they party hard.
But they show up to work.
But they show up to work on Monday morning, and they get shit done.
Morning.
Right. Truly remarkable people, man. And it takes a certain type of fortitude to be able to thrive in those conditions. 4 hours of daylight for 3 months out of the year. I blew that opportunity. I completely fucked it up, because of my, once again, I chose drugs over, friends, art, family, fidelity.
Well, I can definitely take you to some dark places.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe not your most embarrassing moment, because we don't need to go down train spotting, toilet
Right.
diving. What's your most embarrassing artistic moment?
Most embarrassing artistic moment. Wow. I think when I was in art school, I remember taking a painting class, and my dad has always never been super supportive of art. He just doesn't see it as a viable way to make a living. And I remember I got pretty good at doing portraits, at painting. So I thought I would do a portrait of my dad. And so I got my mom to send me a picture of my dad. And I spent a better part of a couple of months, I thought it'd be really cool to have, to do one of those paintings that he could hang in his office, kind of like the old, when you go see the banks or whatever, and you see the there's the paintings of the founders of the banks or whatever, the captains of industry.
And you're trying to fit into the aesthetic, right, and say, somebody did those things. Right. It's like somebody has to document your legacy.
Right.
I'm laughing because I have a feeling I know where this is going. But go ahead.
So I did this painting of my dad, a portrait of my dad based on this picture that my mom had sent me. And I was living in Minnesota at the time. And so I think I sent the painting down, and I remember hey Dad, Merry Christmas, did you get it was either Christmas or his birthday, I can't remember which, but I was like, hey, did you get the painting? He was like, yes, I did, it's very nice. And I was like, great, awesome. And then a little while later, I went to go visit my parents, so I'm at their house, and I'm looking around for, where, look in his office, and don't see the painting, and I kind of start poking around a little bit, and I found it, in the guest bedroom, like behind a chest of drawers, like kind of like tucked away. And I realized that, like, you know, he hated this painting. It didn't even get an honorable mention, like hanging in the garage. Like, it got tucked away. Like,
I don't want to see this again.
Yeah, like, I never want to see this piece of
My
shit painting again.
My dad would hang just every piece of shit I ever did. You know what I'm saying? Like 5th grade war scenes and like just every embarrassing piece of shit on the wall, right? And the one that I remember the most was I was in art school and we had all gone to the museum, and the deal was that you would sit in the museum and like paint or sketch like your or have a finished piece of like a classical piece of work, right? And I had this Tomb Guardian from this like Asian exhibit that was there, and I drew this. I drew it, and it was just, you know, what I could do at the time. It didn't interpret anything, and so there were these pieces that just the piece just kind of faded off into the background, right? And I gave it to my dad, and I was really happy about the whole thing, and he hung it. But then he would always, for the rest of my life, and so, you know, from 19 forward, he would say, and this is well up until, I don't know, 3 years before he died, so well into my 40s, that he would say, you know, I should really get that piece back to you so you can finish it. But this went on and on and on and on, just for years and years. You get that piece back, you can finish that piece.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
Best and worst critic right there.
So what are you working on now?
Right now, I'm working on some mythological beast studies. There's an art show coming up, I believe, in September, so or thereabouts. So I'm kind of working on these mythological beasts recently. Some dragon pictures, sketches. Also some comic book stuff, some design sheets for upcoming, hopefully, comic book graphic novel sort of deal that Big Myth is doing, as well as some skateboard decks. Still kind of plugging away at some skateboards, longboard designs, and apparel for Big Myth as well. That seems to be the focus right now, those things. And also, I've got my eye on a concert poster deal, but that's kind of a little bit down the road. But hopefully, something good will come out of that.
Yeah. So what's the comic book? What's the name of it? I mean, does it have a title at this point?
I don't believe so. I mean, if there is, I haven't.
We may end up going with something like Twisted Pop.
Yeah.
What?
Twisted Pop magazine or Twisted Pop comics or something like that.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. Unless we're going to revive Food Hog comics, but I don't think that it's.
I like the Twisted Pop idea because we've always been going it this way anyway, and now. So, but what's the story that Johnny's working on?
Currently, right now, it's a Western, but it's a Western set in space, which I'm a big fan of the movie Outland, so, which is a great Sean Connery science fiction Western movie. So this is basically about railroad barons and then cattle or buffalo hunters, railroad barons, but in space. So I think it's going to be a good little story. Pistol Pete.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
My last question would be, what memorable responses have you had about your work? Of course, besides hiding the piece behind them.
Well, I remember I mentioned this band in Norway, the Harbor Hookers, and the lead singer of the band was a guy named Øystein. And Øystein, I think I'm pronouncing that right. His stage name was Justin Payne, which I always thought was a great name, Justin Payne. he had asked me to do a tattoo, and this guy we're talking about like 6.5 foot tall Viking looking guy, typical Viking guy, handsome fellow, stern looking, protruding brow, square jaw, covered with like demons and devils and pus dripping skulls, and he had this bare spot right on the side of his calf, and he said, "I want this. You're going to do a tattoo here." Because at the time I was tattooing at a local, tattoos at a local shop up there. But everybody wants a tattoo, right? Especially in a country where they cost like $300 an hour. So and I was charging much less than that. But Justin wanted the tattoo on his leg, and I said, "What can?" He was like, I was like, "What do you want?" And he says, "You do whatever you want." And I'm like, "Whatever I want." He says, "Yeah, whatever you want." And I'm like, "I'll do that, and I'll do it for free," because that was the whole thing. He didn't have any money. So I said, "I'll do it for free, but you can't see it until after I'm done." And he was like, "All right." And so we agreed to meet at a friend's house who just happened to have this party going on. It was one of those parties that had lasted for a couple of days. Lots of speed, lots of booze. So I wound up doing the tattoo underneath the kitchen table, like literally clamped a lamp onto the side of the table so that way he could sit in the chair.
Thailand style.
Right. So I'm like sitting Indian style under the table doing the tattoo on his leg, which went from his knee all the way to his ankle. And I had all my gear down there. And every now and then the drink of choice was kashk, which is grain alcohol mixed with black coffee, as well as liberal amounts of amphetamine. So I'm under the table, and I did this tattoo on his leg without him seeing it. And what I did was I did a pink bunny rabbit, right? Like that went from his knee to his ankle. And my thought was, this guy needs some contrast, right? Because he's got all these pus-dripping skulls and everything.
Every tattoo story you tell me is like this freebooting, like tattooist story. This is hilarious.
So, finally, it took me about 2 or 3 hours to get it done, and I was like, you ready? And he's like, "Yeah, man, it's going to be tough. It's going to be great." And I'm like, "All right, here you go." And he looks at it, and "What the fuck is this?" And he's mad. Like, he's really mad because it's a giant pink bunny rabbit. And I said, hold up. I want you to go into that party, the next room, and I want you to show that tattoo to some of the ladies, And he's like, "What's that going to do?" And I'm like, "Just trust me." So he goes in there, kind of fuming, and he comes back and he's got a girl under each arm. And they're like, "We love it. It's wonderful. Will you do tattoos on us?" So not only did he get laid, because the girls thought it was great. I mean, there's only so many pus-dripping skulls and, drooling demons you can take. They loved it. But then I had all these like hot Norwegian chicks that wanted tattoos as well.
They wanted bunnies.
Yeah, So for me, it was a win-win on both fronts.
I stand by my previous statement that you should write that dean a thank you letter.
Yeah, no kidding.
For inspiring you to do fluffy bunnies for a year or two. So
where do you see your career as an artist going?
Hopefully up. Self-sufficiency is the goal, man. Like, ultimately what I'd like to do is just be able to to work on my art and make a living at it. I don't live an extravagant lifestyle, and I have no desire to be wealthy or famous, but I would just like to be happy and comfortable. I enjoy working with my friends. I enjoy working on collaborative projects as well as my own stuff. I think there's a lot to be said for synergy. So I see myself doing more and more projects with others, more group projects, and just living the life, man. It's a good life.
Awesome. All right, so if you remove money from the equation, what are you working on?
If I remove money,
Like you don't have to have any money, like you've got enough.
what color's the sky in your world?
Though that's why it's just a pie in the sky idea. What you would do with art or anything in general, really. But like, what do you see yourself doing if like somebody said, we're going to pay you the same no matter what you do?
Oh, I would tell stories. I would want to tell stories. And illustrate them. I like children's stories too. I think there's a lot of garbage out there on the market for children, like and there's not enough stuff that like gets kids,
The Johnny Bodman children's book series.
Yeah,
I mean, I understand. Like I could see you doing that, but like my first thought is, oh boy, wow, what would that be? But that's cool.
Yeah, I think a lot of it would just be like, think for yourself mainly, which it's funny because, even that has become think for yourself has become like a trademarked and copyrighted and it's become a hustle. They say one thing, but they mean another, think for yourself, but buy this product, and let us dictate to you how you live your life. I mean, it would be very much an anti-hot topic kind of thing. But the great thing about, the corporate capitalist hierarchy is it gives you something to fight against, right?
Yeah.
It does give you a rallying point. I mean, the rebels wouldn't be very interesting without the empire, so.
There'll always be some empire to fight against, right? And thinking for yourself, if you get enough people into your way of thinking for yourself, then it's not thinking for yourself anymore.
Right.
So you always have some new battle to fight there.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it's just enjoy. Have fun. That's my goal.
So you children's books, and then you were saying telling stories, so like more comic books.
More comic books. And they don't necessarily have to be comic books. I mean, they could be illustrated stories. Barney did some great illustrative work in the '60s or in the '80s and '90s. And there are other artists as well that do a lot of really good, illustrations. And a solid illustration, can make or break a story, I think. What would Sherlock Holmes be without those awesome illustrations from the Strand magazine,
Yeah.
Children's stories was not the most surprising part of this interview. The most surprising thing that I think came out of this interview was the word synergy.
It's a good word.
I hate that fucking word. However, the author and illustrator of Where the Wild Things Are, Maurice Sendak, he said in an interview one time that when it comes to children's stories, that you could tell them anything.
Yeah.
Just tell them anything, and so I think that would fit just right with what you're doing.
Big fan of Maurice Sendak.
Awesome.
Let the wild rumpus begin.
I never know how to end these things.
This is good.
It's hot.
It's hot in here.
From
Boy.
the sweltering, bloody room somewhere.
We're all waiting for the moment when we say this is over and we turn the air conditioner back on. Ashley's over there fanning herself.
But
Ashley Shenanigans, Troy Winscott, Larry Lyons. We've been interviewing Johnny Bodman, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, there you have it, Johnny Bodman and his adventures. I know that we covered very few of those adventures. He's a really funny guy to talk to. And we could probably interview him another 6 or 7 times before we, ran out of, or we got bored with his stories, because he's got a lot more. I think we covered maybe a year of his life total.
A lot more stories and a lot more artwork. Me questioning like how many album covers. That's what I should have asked him in the interview, but I know that he's done a lot of like
metal albums.
Yeah, a lot of metal albums, a lot of punk rock like posters and 45 like album covers and CD covers and just flyers out the ass, and it's just.
But we were talking about death metal, thrashcore, in Sweden. It's Sweden, right?
Yeah,
Norway. Whoops, sorry. So I want to see some of the album covers he did, but I've also seen some of the art, and I even brought it up in the interview. I said something about, how did you develop this style? And he doesn't see it. He doesn't see his art as having a style. But I feel like there's signature stuff in almost everything he does.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe he sees those as weaknesses.
Maybe.
Maybe what I see as style, he sees as weakness.
Yeah, well, I mean, as artists, we only see our own mistakes, so...
I mean, no matter what he does...
Mistakes will trump style, like, every single time.
So in his Urban Weeds contributions, right, and I'll put this in the blog entry as well, but in his Urban Weeds contribution, I see punk folders, punk flyers.
Yeah.
I'm looking for album covers that he may have done, and looking for the bands.
Thank you for listening to the Twisted Podcast. For show notes, go to twistedpop.com/twistedpodcast. Merchandise at bigmyth.com. That's big-mith.com. In association with nquit.com. Until next time, this is the Twisted Podcast.